is a growing consensus among activists and academics that the scourge of violence, and specifically rape, is mishandled in South Africa. Now, in an opinion piece, Professor Amanda Gouws argues why the response from government and from the governing ANC will do little to change the horrifying levels of gender-based violence in South Africa. Professor Gouws, who is the chair of the Essay Research Initiative in Gender Politics at Stellenbosch University, joins us this morning for more on this discussion. Prof, it's great to have you with us on the program. And perhaps before we begin our discussion, a warning to our viewers that we will be talking about rape and sexual violence, and the discussion may be triggering. Prof, before we begin going into the bulk of the article that you wrote, at the end of this article, you talk about, and you've given a quote to illustrate your point, what rape does to a woman. Shall we begin there this morning, Prof?
Yes, thank you. That comes from my colleague, Professor Louise du Toit's book, a philosophical investigation of rape, the making and the unmaking of the self. Now, what she argues in that book is that when a woman gets raped, she loses trust in the world. She loses trust in others and in herself, in the sense of feeling safe. She can never regain that feeling of feeling safe. So in many ways, it shatters her world to the extent that the person she was before the rape is not the same person after the rape, because of the very serious psychological impact on the self and how women experience them living in the world. So it's that undoing of living in the world where you've thought of the world as a place where you can be safe, where you've believed in the good of other people, and that all becomes shattered to the extent that it's never regained again.
I mean, it's devastating. And that description does give us a window into what it means to be a survivor of rape. And when we put it into context with the numbers that you start off your article with, 115 rapes a day, over 42,000 rapes in 2019, 2020, as well as over 7,000, almost 8,000 sexual assaults. It's incredible the amount of survivors in South Africa, and we'll get to the amount of justice that we've seen in just a moment, Prof.
Yes, so those statistics, that is annual. So if we take that over a 10-year period, you can see how devastating and large those numbers are. And we know that those are only the reported rape cases.
Right.
And there's a very huge underreporting. The 1 in 9 campaign estimated 1 in 9 rapes. The Medical Research Council, and this was a couple of years ago, was 1 in 25. So that makes it 1 million rapes a year. And if we take that then over a 10-year period, that makes it 10 million rapes. So you can see how many walking wounded women we have in South Africa as a consequence of rape.
I mean, Prof, you talk about, the response from government and the response from the governing ANC. We know that there's an uproar. Every time there's a shocking incident that makes it into the headlines, there is that moment of shock. There is that moment of activism from citizens, of increased activism, shall we say. And there's that moment where government wants to be seen to be doing something in response to this horrific thing that's just happened. You talk about, how that response individualizes rape in a way that creates the impression that only some men rape. What do you mean by that, Prof, the individualizing of rape?
Well, if we look at how the criminal justice system deals with rape, it's always after the fact, after it's occurred. It's not preventative. So policies to deal with rape is focused on the criminal justice system, and that deals with each rapist, right? There needs to be an investigation, there needs to be a conviction, and so on. So it singles out men who rape as the bad apples, as the monsters, and it doesn't look at the systemic nature and the normalization of rape. So we need to start thinking about how are we going to prevent rape. And this is sort of, if we now look at the policy that the ANC adopted at their policy conference of chemical castration.
Yeah.
It's again looking at perpetrators. It's so misplaced because chemical castration, where it's been used, does not reduce the levels of rape, because once people are free, they need to be monitored to see that they keep taking the medicine. And even if somebody is chemically castrated, which means they're impotent, they can actually still violate women with objects, bottles and sticks and so on. So the focus needs to be, looking at this issue of chemical castration shows that there's a misunderstanding of the systemic nature of rape and the normalization of rape in South Africa. So what we need to do is think about it in a very different way.
Yeah, because what it also does is it brings it down to rape as the result of sexual desire, which again is completely misunderstanding what the power dynamic of rape is about.
Exactly. So rape is about power. It's about entitlement to women's bodies. And I mean, specifically in the case of stranger rape that we've seen in the Krugersdorp case, is the brutality and the savage nature of those rapes. So I think that's the problem. It's not about sexual desire. And so chemical castration works on the suppression of sexual desire.
One does get a sense that government really is at a loss, Professor Gouws, of how to respond to these horrifying levels of sexual violence in South Africa. I mean, in your article, and this is a fact that's been bandied about for some time, the levels of rape in South Africa are akin to countries who are at war, even exceeding some countries at war. Is government really just unable to find a way forward on how to... It's at a loss of what to do, essentially?
Well, I think after hashtag total shutdown in 2017, government tried, and we have accepted the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. It was taken to the provinces, there was consultation on it, and it was accepted as policy. So that is a good plan, but it's long-term interventions. It rests on 6 pillars, which is like protection of women, thinking about, dealing with issues of safety, research, women's economic empowerment, and so on. So it will take, to reach those goals in a country that's really in crisis, where you have enormous joblessness, you have inequality, and then you have a police force that seemingly does not take rape seriously. This whole issue around the Zamazamas, the police was aware that women regularly got raped in West Village by the Zamazamas, but didn't act on it. To implement that plan, it's going to be costly. Money has been budgeted for it, but we're not sure how it's being rolled out. I mean, it needs to be communicated. And I think it's just also the problem is that it is such a long-term plan. And what do we do in the interim? And here, the police becomes the agency of the state that needs to enforce the law. And I just think, but this is a country that has a crisis with more or less everything. So, this is just one more thing that's a crisis in South Africa.
Yeah, you talk about those 6 pillars. Justice is one of those pillars, is among those pillars as well. There's an article on the front page of the Mail and Guardian this morning that talks about a rape case in Limpopo where the case was eventually closed, citing a lack of evidence. And what it boils down to, as the investigating officer didn't know that police can actually access the database of the Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Transport, essentially any department of the state in the national government. So it comes down to a lack of resources, a lack of education as well from the people who are meant to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to book.
Exactly, and that is why the rollout of Thuthuzela care centers is so important, because police stations are supposed to have a Thuthuzela care center. That's part of the victim empowerment program, which is a one-stop center where women, when they've been raped, they make the complaint, the statement, the rape kit gets done, there's counseling, and so on, and hopefully a woman police officer to work with them. Mm-hmm. So that may, once people trained on how to deal with rape and also how to access the necessary systems, then it will improve the outcome. But there's also a problem with rolling out to Thuthuzela care centers. So if you then link this to the backlog of the testing of DNA evidence in laboratories, that all determines if the victim is going to get justice, because you need the evidence. And in the case of stranger rape, consent is not an issue. So it then hinges on whether you have the evidence to link the perpetrators to a specific victim. Now, in the case of Krugersdorp, these men were wearing balaclavas. Apparently, they have been identified for an identity parade. But now, when it comes to court, there needs to be a link between them, the DNA evidence, other evidence, and it depends. Has that evidence been taken in the correct way? Will there be, because we don't have, it was such a chaotic situation, there are no witnesses, or if there are witnesses, how reliable is their testimony because of the trauma that was going on there. So it really, the outcome in rape cases, in order to secure justice for the victims, it's very difficult when you don't have the right evidence, and that, I think, is part of the problem, how well the police handle the evidence.
Yeah, so many legs to this discussion around where the gaps lie insofar as addressing the scourge of gender-based violence and rape is concerned. Professor Amanda Gouws, let me thank you for your time this morning, Chair of the Essay Research Initiative in Gender Politics at Stellenbosch University.